Hello, and welcome to another episode of Ideas for the Workplace, where I talk to leaders about their leadership journey and how they make their workplaces inclusive. I'm your host, Hedieh Azad, and in today's episode, I will talk with Alain Hippolyte about his leadership journey and what it means to be an introvert leader. Alain has over a decade of leadership experience and is informally known as the quiet leader. Welcome, Alain, and thanks for joining me.
Thanks so much for having me, Hedieh. And you spelled my name right, or you said my name right. Thank you so much.
My pleasure. All right. So, can you tell me about your leadership journey and how you got to this point in your career?
Sure. Yeah, it's nothing sexy. It's nothing spectacular. I think most of it has been through grit. But in hindsight, what I recognize is I'm a little unconventional. It required really kind of strategic relationships and strong mentors and advocates for me to elevate to where I am today. And I think I'd like to think that there's an opportunity to change leadership, generally speaking, and give an opportunity to people that are a bit on the quieter side paths, that are big on emotional intelligence to ascend as leaders.
Wonderful. And you talked about mentorship. So, mentorship and emotional intelligence. I'm
Mm,
curious as to the role of mentorship in your career. And then you talk about emotional intelligence. So, can you tell me about those?
for sure, for sure. Yeah. So in terms of mentorship, I think what's sometimes hidden narrative is the fact that you need sponsors, you need mentors, you need people to champion and really kind of push you out of your comfort zone. And throughout my career, I've been like very grateful and privileged really to be surrounded by people that have like supported my journey, really pushed me to embrace my quiet confidence. Sometimes they model that quiet confidence as well. And so finding a mentor, I talk about it a lot. I write it about it a lot as well. And I think you have to be very intentional about identifying those people in your circle. I think it can be really powerful, regardless of the stage you're at in your journey. I would also add that then you have to pay it forward. And so if you have some
Mhm.
mentors, you have some champions, play the same role in your immediate environment. And your mentor doesn't have to be a know-it-all. You just have to be someone that's a little further ahead of you, um, and someone that has potentially a bit more experience than you in your space. And they could be really effective partnerships.
Mhm. And then you also talked about emotional intelligence. And I know that you also write a lot about kindness in your posts on
Mm.
LinkedIn. So, can you tell me a little bit about kindness and emotional intelligence and the role in leadership?
Yeah, and let me just preface this with like I'm not necessarily an expert on emotional intelligence, but what I'll tell you is there's a lot of literature out there that supports that
Mhm.
emotional intelligence is a strong determinant for success in life. And I really think the 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 landscape of leadership is changing to the point where if you do not have emotional intelligence, if you do not have strong people skills, you can't be effective. The workforce today demands people that have understanding of humans and is somebody that's compassionate, somebody that's flexible, somebody that's transparent, somebody that's down to earth. I think that's what the young workforce is looking for. I think around kindness, my message isn't novel. I'm not saying anything new. I think what I'm saying really is you can get much further by being kind. You can get amazing results by being gentle and by being easy to work with. And essentially I'm saying to leaders, say yes more often than you say no.
Yeah, I love that. Yeah, say yes more than you say no. Wonderful. So you also write about quiet leadership and you're
Mhm.
informally known as a quiet leader. So what does that really mean?
Ooh, it's a heavy question. It means so many different things to various people. And I know in business circles, the terminology that's more common is probably introverts, extroverts, and recently concepts like ambiverts, someone that's kind of in the middle, comes up a lot. And for me, what it means, and I give this example every time I get a chance, as an introverted person, I have to manage my energy. I have to pick my spots. And so for me, if I wake up in the morning and you imagine a glass of water, and in the morning, that glass is filled. Throughout the day, after every interaction, my social battery kind of drains, or that glass kind of, there's less and less water. And so in order for me to maintain like a reasonable amount of water or a safe amount of water in that glass, I have to just pick my spots. I have to manage the amount of interactions I have. And there's probably some settings I thrive in more than others. So for an example, as an introvert, I know one-on-one like this is probably easier for me than a big room where I need to network and play the room and shake hands. And I think sometimes people that are like me, one are seen as like antisocial, shy,
Mhm.
timid, reserved. And in leadership, that doesn't fit like the traditional, prototype. Leaders are seen as like overly confident. There's something called executive presence,
Yeah.
and having like, a big place in every room that you sit in, and like, sitting at the head of the table and calling all the shots and being loud. And that's just not me. And frankly, I think there's a room for introvert leaders, for quiet leaders to lead. There's a lot of room for them, and they can be immensely impactful in various industries and sectors.
So that leads to another question. So you talk about, extrovert leaders are really loud and they have this executive presence, and introverts are not like that. So how can you get ahead and further your career as an introvert?
Yeah, it's the question of the century for me. I think there's various things. So one is, don't feel the need to compensate. If I can give any advice, it would be, you don't need to feel the need to compensate and to present as an extrovert. I think you have to also, as an introvert, and it's a very binary way of looking at it, right? Like we say introvert and extrovert. The concept itself is like 100 or like 100 plus years old. Carl Jung introduced this to the world, or was one of the first people to kind of speak about the concept. But simply put, as an introvert, there are techniques you can use to be effective. You can, let me go back to what I was saying earlier. One is, you have to be okay with building relationships. It's essential in business. So you have to, you know, put yourself in uncomfortable environments at times and figure out the best way for you to build those relationships. Again, in a one-on-one setting, ideal. In this digital world where we can exchange like this, ideal. In written fashion, ideal. I think your work can speak for itself, but you have to find a way to promote your work. And so there are other ways of being effective, of being noticed, even as an introvert, but you have to find a way that works for you. And also, you have to find allies that are extroverts as well. And, I was speaking about mentors earlier and sponsors. Maybe some of your mentors, some of your allies are extroverts. When you go into a meeting, maybe it's making the strategic decision to side beside the extroverted person so that they can kind of, the conversation can come towards you because you're physically sitting beside them. So I think there are some techniques, but generally speaking, my message again isn't novel. It's not too radical, I'd like to think. What I'm saying is, you can be quiet and be very effective. You can be quiet and be an amazing leader. You can be quiet and, speak publicly and do all these things that are usually attributed to really loud personalities and overly confident personalities.
Yeah, I like your advice about sitting next to an extrovert person. I'm definitely gonna try that next time I'm in a meeting. Because like you, I'm an introvert and pretty
Mm.
quiet, but that's wonderful advice. What are some of the myths around, being an introvert leader?
Yeah, so I think one, we can be perceived as indecisive because we're not often. carrying the conversation. We don't feel the need to. That's a perception that I've come across in my entire career. Also, there's this notion that we can't be firm because we have a more reserved kind of approach. We can be very firm. I think, again, I spoke about this earlier, but this idea of being an antisocial person or timid or shy depends on the setting. I think, yes, we can be shy, but I think extroverts can be shy as well. Their shyness or anxieties manifest themselves in different ways. Like an extroverted person might just keep on talking, keep on talking, keep on talking, whereas an introvert just stays a little reserved. But I think um, these are all misconceptions. And as introverts, we have an opportunity to demystify demystify a bit of the perceptions of, introverts.
Yeah, wonderful. So, has being an introvert, you mentioned about those one-on-one conversations that you're good at as an introvert. Has this in any way given you an advantage as to creating more inclusive teams?
Mm. Yeah, the message I keep putting out there is there's this beautiful opportunity that we have as introverts to create room for others to contribute. And so the traditionally silent groups, the traditionally unheard groups now have a space to contribute because we naturally create that environment. I think it can be a very inclusive environment if you're at the table with an introvert leader, whereas someone may have to intentionally seek the opinions of others. I think an introvert can do that very naturally. I think in terms of introverts, at least my observations have been they're deep thinkers and they value the opinions of other deep thinkers. And yeah, I think there's a lot to be said about our ability to naturally allow for others to contribute.
Yeah, I agree with you in the sense that, introverts are also more observant, I find, right?
Mm,
So they really pay attention to the fact that other people on the team are sometimes not speaking up, right? Are very quiet during meetings. And I think that as an introvert, maybe this is an advantage in helping the team to speak up, maybe not calling on the person who's not talking, but maybe during those one-on-one conversations, bringing that up as a potential development opportunity even, to talk more and as some kind of a growth, something that the person has not done or is not normally doing
mm.
to help them even advance in their career. So we really like that point.
Yeah, I guess what I would say too, just around introverts, I found interesting is for me, the conversation doesn't start and end in a large group. It's potentially just, the start of a conversation, but the conversation continues. And as an introvert, you can continue to your point, that conversation in the one-on-one settings. And often I find myself not necessarily ready to provide an opinion immediately. So one technique that I use quite often is I'm still formulating my opinion. I'll get back to you. And introverts can, because we're deep thinkers and to your point, we're very observant. We can also read the room really well, right? And I think that's really important in leadership for sure.
Yeah, that's all part of emotional intelligence, I think,
Mhm.
to be able to read the room and then also really taking the time to analyze an issue before giving an answer, thinking about different aspects, the impact of the decision on different team members before
Mm,
really making a decision. I really like
mm,
that.
mhm.
So, my next question, sort of a little bit related to that, is what is the role or how do you handle unconscious biases when you're making decisions?
Mm. Yeah, I think again, it goes back to thinking deeply, not rushing to decision making. I think that's really important. I think you highlighted that well that, we don't necessarily feel obligated to make decisions right then and there and to really kind of question your thinking. I think seeking input from others extremely important. All the reasons or all the opportunities don't come to my mind now, but I think, uh, generally speaking, for me as a leader, if I want to be mindful of bias, it's also making sure that the people that are at the table have different lived experiences, have different lenses that I may not have. And so, it's inviting, um, the different lived experiences to the table. There's a saying I heard recently, which I really, really enjoyed. And I forget in which context it was exposed to me, but it was this notion of like, don't speak about me without me, right? And so if you really want to have inclusive kind of perspectives and contributions, then make sure you have contributions from members of every kind of lived experience where possible. So I think that's a way to kind of mitigate unconscious biases, but it starts with, learning and kind of educating yourself and doing some of that research as well.
So the first step is always the education, of course, and then practicing it, right? So, maybe taking some workshops on unconscious bias just to
Mm.
know what are some of the unconscious biases that can show up when a leader is making a decision. And then that also plays into building trust, I think, with team members, especially underrepresented team members. So, how do you build trust within your team?
Mm. Well, first, if you allow me, I'd like to even go back to this, notion of unconscious bias. I think there's an interesting conversation happening in the world right now around, the merits of equity, diversity, inclusion, and belonging. And we don't have to get into that, but I really do think, um, everyone has a part to play in that. Everyone is accountable to some extent, and so that's to your point. It does start with educating yourself and researching, and not necessarily relying on an infrastructure to provide that for you. You have to do that research on your own. And I think sometimes where I can feel defeated, where I have felt defeated is when people go, well, I didn't know. And that's okay. It's okay not to know, but you also have an accountability to go out there and do a bit of research and be curious. I think that's an important part of in conversation. If we want to be inclusive, we have to start from a point of curiosity. And again, when I talk about quiet leadership and the deep thinking, I think that's in there as well. And that's very important to me, at least. In terms of building trust, I think, it's very easy for leaders to talk about transparency, right? It's at the tip of their tongue all the time. And it's something that, a lot of leaders would like to scream at the top of a mountain, I'm transparent. We're transparent and we're all about transparency. But living that, really living that, coming down a level, I talk about it often, being without an ego and leadership, saying things like, I don't know. I don't have the answer. I'm going to try and find the answer, but I don't have the answer. Or saying things like, I don't know. What do you think? Making concessions. I think that's a conversation that we don't often have in leadership. And, that's also around my idea of kindness in leadership, just to build some goodwill. We trade in a marketplace of handshakes and goodwill. So if you do some good for someone, chances are they'll return the favor. And so if you want to build trust with people, you have to be willing to make some concessions. And, there's the old adage, scratch my back and I'll scratch yours. There's a lot of merit to that in business. And I think if you're a leader today, you have to be flexible. You can't micromanage your people. You got to empower them to make decisions on their own. And that will naturally build trust within the team.
Wonderful. You pointed out to a lot of key elements of leadership. You talked about transparency, accountability, empowering the team, being curious. I love that, being curious, not just to find out answers, but just learn about the team. And the other thing that I would like to add to that, and I think you mentioned it in a way as to kindness and just letting people know that you could be wrong or you don't have all the answers. That means you're being vulnerable. You're admitting I don't have all the answers. And when you show that vulnerability to people, that's how you can build trust with them. You're showing them your authentic self.
Mm,
So a lot of times I see leaders who are, I have all the answers, and the ego, like you said, is there. And that just I find that creates sometimes fear and sometimes resentment. But by being open like that and admitting that you don't have all the answers and being vulnerable, being transparent, I think
mhm.
that's when you can really build trust. And I think when you show those characteristics, your team would be willing to go the extra mile, I find. So, all great points there. And my last question, what advice do you have for new leaders?
Yeah, and, I think the previous, like just the recent topics are a really good segue. I was just gonna add that if you show up as a human, you've got a competitive advantage. If you show up without an ego, you have a competitive advantage, and I think that can make you a fantastic leader. You need to treat people like people. You need to be flexible. Um, and if you're a new leader, to your point earlier, you don't need to have all the answers. And I get that that's hard because leadership often comes, formal leadership, established leadership in an organization often comes with a title and a salary. And so you feel almost an obligation to provide all those answers and steer the ship. But I'll tell you what, the ship will go much further if you're willing to share control, if you're willing to share, responsibilities and accountabilities, or responsibilities and decision making. You'll go much further if um, your ego stays at home. And lastly, relationships are important. Relationships are important. Today, if you're a new leader, you might be leading a team, and somebody on that team will be your boss one day. And so those relationships are important. Nurture relationships. Again, say yes more often than you say no, whether it's with the people you're working with today, directly, that report directly to you, or even your colleagues, your peers. Build some goodwill, not because you expect something in return, but because you know that in a few years there most likely will be a return. If there isn't, that's okay.
Mhm.
But goodwill goes really far for you as a leader. And so say yes more often than you say no and show up without an ego. I think that's a good starting point for any.
Yeah, I also liked that you mentioned being flexible. I often find leaders who say, no, you have to be in the office 5 days a week, and they show no flexibility on that. Well, that won't get you very far, right? But if you show some flexibility and not, okay, maybe you can work from home a couple of days a week, then I find people are also more relaxed and less stressed, and they can be more productive. So absolutely, flexibility is key for a leader. So thank you so much, Alain, for joining me, for sharing all your wonderful insights, talking to me about being a quiet leader. I really enjoyed our conversation. Join me next time for another episode of Ideas in the Workplace. Until then, goodbye.